Shaq hardly ever mentions it. But I think he believes that he should have won more than one MVP award. And he's not alone in his thinking. For many of us, he's the most dominant force ever and one of the 10 greatest players of all time. It doesn't seem right that a player of his caliber only has one MVP. The year that he did win it was one of the most dominant individual seasons ever. He nearly became the first player to ever be voted as unanimous MVP winner. This, of course, came in the 1999/2000 season. We saw what his peak was, and it was as high as any player that's ever lived. Surely there had to be other seasons where he was good enough to be considered the league's most valuable player. So let's go through his career and see how many times he was truly deserving of winning the MVP. Let's start eliminating the years where we know he wasn't in contention to win the award. We can take away his rookie year for sure. We can also eliminate the years where he was no longer in his prime. We're talking from the 2006 season to his retirement. So that leaves us for the 1993/94 season to the 2004/05 season. That's 12 years of his prime that we're going to be analyzing. However, not all of those seasons he was in serious contention. There are 4 total years that we can take away. We have the 2003/04 season, his last year with the Lakers. This was when Gary Payton and Karl Malone joined the team. Since there was a surplus of talent, Shaq wasn't putting up MVP-like numbers. We can also eliminate the 1995/96 season through the 1997/98 season. For those 3 years, injuries took him out of contention. He only played 54 games in 96, 51 games in 97, and 60 games in 98. That's too low of a number for any player to win the award. So now we have 7 seasons to consider. So let's start from the beginning. We first have the 1993/94 season. This was Shaq's sophomore year, and he was already the most dominant force in the game. He averaged 29.3 points per game on 59.9% shooting, 13.2 rebounds per game, and 2.9 blocks per game. This allowed the Orlando Magic to have his first 50-win season in franchise history. Was he fully developed at this stage of his career? No, he wasn't. But does it really matter how he's getting his points if he's scoring with that kind of efficiency? The reality is that he could have had the highest points per game average by any player that shot over 60% from the field. He took and missed 2 3-pointers that took his average down to 59.9%. That's how close he was to posting those historic numbers. But we all get the idea. This was one of the most dominant scoring seasons in NBA history. Can you believe a player having those record-breaking numbers was only selected to the All-NBA 3rd team? That was a trick question, because they got this one right. He wasn't better than Hakeem Olajuwon or David Robinson that year. That's why Hakeem won the MVP, and he was certainly deserving of it. So we can say that the league got this one right. What about the following season? He averaged 29.3 points per game on 58.3% shooting, 11.4 rebounds per game, and 2.4 blocks per game. He averaged the same amount of points as the previous year, but he added a new repertoire of jump hooks and turnaround jumpers. He was also showing more patience and maturity while drawing double or triple teams. Instead of creating turnovers by bullying his way to the basket, he was now passing the ball back to the various shooters that the Magic had. This team was loaded with talent, and they were so entertaining to watch. Penny Hardaway also blossomed into one of the perennial stars of the NBA, but Shaq was undoubtedly their best player. He was even able to win his first scoring title. As great as his numbers were, it still wasn't as impressive as what David Robinson accomplished. He posted historically great numbers while leading the Spurs to a league best 62 wins, and he did it without a single All-Star. It only makes sense that they gave him the award. Now things start getting a little more interesting. We have the 1999 lockout season, and he was finally healthy enough to play the majority of the year. He averaged 26.3 points per game on 57.7% shooting, 10.7 rebounds per game, and 2.3 assists per game. The problem this time around was that he didn't experience enough team success. There were 6 other teams that had a better record than the Lakers. That included the Spurs, the Utah Jazz, the Blazers, the Miami Heat, the Indiana Pacers, and even the Orlando Magic. Because of that, Shaq wasn't just snubbed from the top 5 in MVP voting, he was also snubbed from making the All-NBA first team. Alonzo Mourning was considered the more valuable center. In fairness, it wasn't Shaq's fault that the Lakers were so dysfunctional. They went through a coaching change 12 games into the season. They got rid of Nick Van Exel. They signed Dennis Rodman for whatever reason, and he only played 23 games. Kobe was only 20 years old, and he wasn't considered one of the best players in the league yet, and they traded Eddie Jones for Glenn Rice in the middle of the season. So it wasn't all Shaq's fault for some of the team's struggles. I honestly think if the Lakers were a little bit better, that he would have won it, but he didn't do enough to carry his team to a better record. Next up, we have the 2001 season. The numbers that Shaq posted are almost identical to his 2000 MVP season. Here are his numbers side by side from the 2 years. He was equally as dominant on the offensive end, but the numbers say that he wasn't nearly as impactful on defense. So what exactly changed? It seemed like O'Neal was playing lackadaisical defense to prove a point. The one quote that comes to mind came when he said this, quote, "I don't get involved with what guys want to do individually, but I've always wanted to be a team player, and if the big dog ain't me, then the house won't get guarded. Period." End of quote. This came during the back and forth battle between Shaq and Kobe. The root of the problem was that Shaq was bothered that the Lakers didn't begin many of their offensive plays by first going inside to him. That would in turn create many easy baskets for the rest of his teammates. Kobe's aggressiveness and increased role in the offense frustrated him. He argued during the season that the switch from an interior to a perimeter offense is what caused his defense to worsen. That might have had something to do with it, but the fact that he publicly stated that he wouldn't protect the paint if he wasn't the big dog, he's basically admitting that he wasn't going to give the same effort. Now it's fair to say that he's not the only reason why the Lakers defense got so much worse from the previous year, but it is one of the determining factors. They went from having the best defensive rating in the league in 2000 to finishing 21st in 2001. That has something to do with the Lakers winning 67 games in 2000 to winning 56 games. It's hard to imagine that the league voters will reward Shaq after his team suffered such a drop-off. As a Lakers fan, this was tremendously frustrating because he was obviously still the best player in the world, and it wasn't even close. He finished with the highest win shares, PER, box plus minus, and field goal percentage in the league. He finished second in offensive win shares per 48 minutes, value over replacement player rating, and offensive box plus minus. He also finished third in points and rebounds. The MVP was his to lose if he hadn't gone in his own way. His playoff numbers from this year and the 2000 playoffs are nearly identical across the board, which include the defensive metrics. In my opinion, this could have been the greatest 2-year stretch that we've ever seen from a player, but pride and ego robbed him of a second MVP award that we all feel he deserved. No disrespect to Allen Iverson, but Shaq was just at another level during this time. For the next 2 seasons, Shaq played 67 games each year and was essentially playing his way to shape in order to be fully healthy for the playoffs. His numbers were great and he was still dominant, but his game took a step down because of his toe injury that forced him to miss a chunk of games. At this point in his career, regular season awards were not what he was gunning for. He was looking to immortalize his name by leading his team to 3 and potentially 4 straight titles, and it was all about getting his body and troops ready for another long playoff run. He did exactly that in 2002. Now we get to the final qualifying season and the most controversial one, the 2005 season when he lost the MVP to Steve Nash. Let's be honest, neither of their numbers is noteworthy. Shaq averaged 22.9 points per game on 60% shooting, 10.4 rebounds per game, and 2.3 blocks per game. Nash averaged 15.5 points per game on 50% shooting, 11.5 assists per game, and 3.3 rebounds per game. In my opinion, the MVP award should have gone to the Diesel, no question about it. The case for him is simple. The Miami Heat were looking like serious championship contenders for the first time in franchise history, and Shaq was mainly responsible for that. With his one offseason move, he shifted the balance of power from the Western Conference to the Eastern Conference. A player with that kind of impact should be able to win the MVP rather easily in a lesser competitive season. Everyone points to how the Suns improved drastically in Nash's first year, but we can also say the same thing about the Miami Heat. The biggest contribution that Shaq had was on offense. In the previous year, they were a below average offensive team. They had the 7th lowest average in points per game, and they were 15th in offensive rating. For this season, they had the 4th highest points per game average and the 5th best offensive rating. Although the leap that Dwayne Wade took in his game had a lot to do with their improvement, the main contributing factor was the array of open shots that the Heat players were now receiving with Shaq's presence alone. Just about every player from the Heat went up in field goal shooting. That was all part of his greatness. He made everyone better without even touching the ball. And we all know what he could do when he decided to be aggressive. There were still times when he looked like his old self. Then when you saw what was happening in Los Angeles, the argument for Shaq became even stronger. The Lakers went from a team that reached the finals and won 57 games to only winning 34 games and missing the playoffs. On the other hand, Shaq carried the Miami Heat from winning 42 games to 59. Now for Steve Nash's argument, there's no question that the Suns experienced a much greater turnaround than the Heat did. However, the team that Nash left, the Dallas Mavericks, improved by 6 wins without him. I think Shaq did just enough to win that award, but he was snubbed. So here's the final mark. Shaq should have won 2 MVPs, but he could have potentially had a total of 4. He should have owned the NBA after Michael Jordan retired, but there were too many factors outside of basketball that robbed him of that opportunity. I know he likes to blame the media for losing the MVP in 2005, but he can't say the same about the 1999 lockout season or the 2001 season. History was certainly within his grasp, but he could never stay completely focused.